This is a compilation of some of the creepiest, classic, true scary stories found on the internet. I've only ever read one of these stories on my channel about a year ago. But like I said, they are all classics. So if you've heard any of them, I will be leaving timestamps for each story in the description and pinned comment, just in case you want to skip past any. Now that that's out of the way, I hope you enjoy the video, and let's begin. I have always had an innate fear of the night. Not so much the dark, but the night itself. As a child, my imagination was overcome with stories of creatures that come alive at night, and the safety offered by a house and light. I never had anything to base this fear on, until a night when I decided to go with a buddy of mine to a baseball game and got stuck at a light at 2 a.m. after dropping him off at home. Of course, that night, the game went into extra innings, and so I didn't get a chance to drop my friend off back home until well after 1 a.m. Everything was fine on the way home, until I hit a light right before the street that led to my house. It was a T-junction, and I was turning left. The light is one of those that you think is broken, until it finally turns green, right when you finally decide to just run it. Of course, I pulled up, right as the light turned red. I would have just run the light, seeing as no one was there, and it was closing in on 2 a.m. on a school night. But earlier that week, I had heard the phrase, "Character is what you do when no one is looking." And for whatever reason, that was the night I decided to prove to myself that I was a man of character. Big mistake. I pulled to a stop at the light, feeling good about myself, bordering on self-righteous, when I happened to look out my window to my left and noticed a lady sitting all alone on a bus bench. We made brief eye contact, and I quickly looked away. It was too late. I could see movement out of my peripheral vision and knew she was coming my way. I looked out the window and noticed she was carrying a bag. I quickly checked that my doors were locked and all my windows were up. I then moved my right foot above the accelerator just in case and braced myself for what was to come. I was hoping it would be just an awkward exchange and was praying for a quick light change before she reached me, so I could just get out of there. I knew there was a slim chance of that. She walked right up to my window, put down her bag, and began to tap on my window. I nervously looked up at her, and she motioned for me to put my window down. I had automatic windows, so I just imagined pushing too hard on the window button and that thing just coming all the way down. So I took a deep breath and lightly flicked it with my finger. The window moved microscopically down, but she did not seem to notice or care. She then leaned in and began to talk. She said, "My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Can you give me a ride?" I should stop and give a brief physical description of the bag lady. She was small and skinny and of indeterminate age. She was either in her mid-20s and had lived a hard 20-plus years on the street, or she was a 60-something-year-old who had lived a moderately hard life on the street. All that to say, just by looking at her, there was no way to verify her story. She looked beat up by life, not just by a boyfriend. But there was something about her delivery. It was robotic and seemed practiced and like she was disconnected from the moment that made my skin crawl. And after a brief, about a second debate on whether I should do it, I told her that I had to get home and could not give her a ride. After my first refusal, she leaned in closer and said the same thing again. "My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Can you give me a ride?" This time, I felt more confident when I declined to give her a ride and told her I had a curfew and had to get home. She leaned in a third time and began her statement again. "My boyfriend beat me." At this point, the light changed. I slowly lifted my foot off the brake and started slowly rolling forward and began muttering an apology. She didn't move. She just looked at the light, then looked down at me, leaned in closer, and said 5 words that have haunted me ever since. "You made the right decision." Then she picked up her bag and walked back towards the bench. I peeled out of the intersection and cried and screamed all the way home. I have no idea what she planned to do, or if people were waiting to jump in my car from the bushes had I moved to let her in. But that encounter has haunted me ever since and has confirmed in my mind that nothing good happens after dark. The moment the phone rang, I knew something was wrong. My parents had just left me alone for the first time, and already the house felt different. Too quiet, too empty, as if the walls themselves were listening. I grew up in a small, sleepy town in the American Midwest, a place where everyone knew your name and strangers were rare. The streets were lined with old oak trees, their branches casting long, shifting shadows at night. My parents trusted me to stay home alone now that I was 12. But tonight, that trust felt fragile, like a thin sheet of ice over deep water. The silence of the house, the absence of familiar voices, and the darkness outside all conspired to make me feel utterly alone and vulnerable. The phone rang again. I stared at it, my heart pounding. Who would be calling this late? My parents had just left for dinner with friends, and my sister was away at camp. I picked up the receiver, my hands shaking. "Hello?" I whispered. There was silence on the other end, a long, heavy silence. Then, just as I was about to hang up, a voice, low, gravelly, unfamiliar, said, "Are you alone?" I froze. The question echoed in my mind, twisting my stomach into knots. How did they know? I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The line went dead, leaving me in a state of panic and confusion. I put the phone down, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts. The house creaked around me, settling into the cool night air. I told myself it was just a prank call, but the fear wouldn't let go. I retreated to the living room, turning on every light I could find. The TV flickered to life, but I couldn't focus on the show. My mind kept replaying that voice, those words. "Are you alone?" Hours passed. I tried to distract myself with games, but every noise, the hum of the fridge, the wind rustling the trees outside, made me jump. I checked the locks on the doors and windows, my hands trembling. The night stretched on, endless and suffocating. Then, just as I was starting to calm down, I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate, as if someone was taking their time, savoring the moment. My heartbeat became louder than the storm outside, thudding in my ears, filling me with a terror that was almost palpable. I crouched behind the couch, my body tense. The doorbell rang, sharp and sudden. I didn't move. It rang again. Then, the sound of the doorknob turning, rattling in its frame. "Please, I need help," a voice called from outside. "My car broke down. I just need to use your phone." I stayed silent, my breath shallow. The voice sounded different from the one on the phone, but that didn't make me feel any safer. The doorknob rattled again, harder this time. I crept upstairs, my legs weak with fear. The only phone was in my parents' room. I locked the door behind me, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. I called my mom's cell, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried my dad's, but no answer. The footsteps returned, this time inside the house. I could hear them downstairs, slow and steady, moving from room to room. My heart pounded so hard, I thought it might burst. I crawled under the bed, curling into a ball. The footsteps climbed the stairs, pausing outside each door. My sister's room, the bathroom, then, finally, my parents' room. The door handle turned, but the lock held. The intruder knocked softly at first, then harder. I bit my lip to keep from crying out. Silence. Then, the footsteps retreated, fading into the distance. I stayed under the bed, my body trembling, my mind racing. Who was in my house? Why were they here? Was it connected to the phone call? I don't know how long I stayed there, but eventually I heard sirens. The police arrived, their voices loud and urgent. They called my name, and I crawled out from under the bed, my legs numb from fear. I thought my parents called 911. The officers searched the house, but the intruder had already left. The back door was open, the screen torn. The police said it was probably just a random break-in, but I knew better. That phone call, that voice, it was personal. The next day, my parents came home, their faces pale with worry. They hugged me tight, promising never to leave me alone again. But the fear stayed with me, a shadow that followed me everywhere. A week later, I found a note taped to my bedroom window. It said, "I know you're alone." I never told my parents about the note. I kept it hidden under my mattress, a secret I couldn't bear to share. The fear became a part of me, twisting my dreams into nightmares. I started seeing things, shadows moving in the corners of my vision, whispers in the dark. One night, I woke to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open on its own. I lay frozen in bed, my heart pounding. A shadow stretched across my door, tall and thin, before a figure stepped into the room. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its eyes on me, watching, waiting. I closed my eyes, praying for the morning. When I opened them again, the figure was gone. But the door was still open, and on the floor, another note. "You'll never be alone again." I screamed, but no one came. Years passed, and the fear never left. I moved away for college, but the notes kept coming. Sometimes in my mailbox, slipped under my door. Always the same message. "You'll never be alone again." I tried to move on, to forget, but the past clung to me like a second skin. I started seeing the figure everywhere, in crowds, in reflections, in my dreams. I knew it was only a matter of time before it found me again. One night, alone in my apartment, I heard footsteps outside my door, slow, deliberate. My heartbeat became louder than the storm outside. The door creaked open on its own, and a shadow stretched across the floor. This time, I didn't scream. I didn't run. I sat on my bed, waiting. The figure stepped into the room, its face finally visible. It was me, my reflection, twisted and wrong, staring back at me with empty eyes. The last note was in my hand, written in my own handwriting. "You'll never be alone again." And I knew, with a terrible certainty, that I never would be. The fear had become me, a part of my mind, my soul, my very being. The intruder was inside all along, and there was no escape. I woke to the sound of my own name, whispered from somewhere inside the walls. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming, but the voice came again. Soft, urgent, impossibly close. "Eli. Eli." I sat up, heart hammering, sweat chilling my skin. My apartment was silent except for the wind rattling the old glass panes. The city outside was a distant hum, muffled by the thick stone walls of the building. It was 3:14 a.m. I knew, because the red digits of the alarm clock glared at me like an accusation. Was someone in my apartment? Or was it just the echo of a nightmare, the residue of grief that had haunted me for months? I moved here after my brother died. The landlord called it a classic Bombay flat. Ornate ironwork on the balconies, mosaic tiles in the hallway, ceilings so high my voice seemed to vanish into them. I told myself I needed the change, that the city's chaos would drown out the memories. But the nights were long, and the walls were thin, and sometimes I heard things I couldn't explain. That night, the voice was only the beginning. As I lay there, trying to convince myself it was nothing, I heard footsteps in the corridor outside my door. Slow, deliberate. Each step seemed to echo through the building, as if the old wood remembered every footfall it had ever borne. I held my breath, waiting for the sound to fade, but it only grew louder, closer, until it stopped right outside my door. I stared at the crack beneath the door. The light in the hallway flickered, and a shadow stretched across the threshold before the footsteps moved on. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling my heartbeat thundering louder than the storm outside. Why would anyone be wandering these halls at this hour? The building was mostly empty. Just me, an old woman downstairs, and the caretaker who vanished at dusk. I tried to remember if I'd locked the door. I always did. Didn't I? I got up, every muscle tense, and crept to the door. I pressed my ear to the wood. Silence. Then, a faint scraping sound, like fingernails dragging along the wall. My skin prickled. I checked the lock. It was secure. I forced myself to breathe, to believe I was safe, but the sense of being watched only grew stronger. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw my brother's face, pale, accusing, his eyes wide with the terror of his final moments. Guilt gnawed at me. I should have been there. I should have answered his call. I should have... A sudden crash jolted me upright. Something had fallen in the kitchen. I grabbed the heavy flashlight I kept by the bed and edged down the hallway. The kitchen door was ajar, swaying gently, as if someone had just passed through. I flicked on the light. The window above the sink was open, and rain was blowing in. A glass lay shattered on the floor. I was certain I hadn't left the window open. I closed it, locked it, and turned to leave, then froze. On the fogged glass, a message had been scrawled with a finger. "Let me in." My breath caught in my throat. I wiped the glass clean, heart pounding, telling myself it was a prank, a trick of condensation. But the letters were unmistakable. I backed out of the kitchen, every instinct screaming at me to run. But where would I go? The city outside was a labyrinth of alleys and shadows, and the storm had turned the streets into rivers. I returned to my room, locked the door, and crawled beneath the covers like a child. I tried to call someone, anyone, but my phone was dead, the charger missing. Had I unplugged it? Or had someone else? The wind howled, the building groaned, and then, from the darkness, the voice returned, closer this time, as if it were inside the room. "Eli, why did you leave me?" I clamped my hands over my ears. "Stop it," I whispered. "You're not real." But the voice only grew louder, more insistent. "You promised you'd never leave. You promised." A cold weight settled on my chest. I couldn't breathe. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The room pressed in on me, the walls seeming to pulse with each frantic beat of my heart. Then, the door creaked open on its own. A figure stood in the doorway, tall and thin, its face obscured by shadow. But I knew that silhouette. I'd seen it every night in my dreams. My brother. His shadow stretched across my bed before he ever entered. He stepped forward, and the air grew colder, thick with the scent of rain and something rotten. "Why didn't you answer?" he whispered. "Why did you let me die?" Tears streamed down my face. "I'm sorry," I choked. "I tried. He moved closer, his eyes empty, black as the void. "You left me alone. Now, you'll never be alone again." He reached out, his fingers icy on my skin. My vision blurred, the room spinning. I tried to pull away, but his grip was iron. The lights flickered. The world tilted. When I woke, it was morning. Sunlight streamed through the window. The storm was gone. The apartment was silent. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare. But then I saw the message on the glass, written in fresh condensation. "You're home now." My brother's photograph lay on the pillow beside me, his eyes gouged out, a twisted smile carved into the paper. I tried to scream, but my voice was gone. Now, every night I hear footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. His shadow stretches across my door before he ever enters. My heartbeat is louder than the storm outside. The door creaks open on its own, and I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, I will never be alone again.